An interviewer recently introduced a question to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks with the following stereotype. Almost every Christian service is more spiritual than almost every synagogue service. But almost every Shabbat meal is more spiritual than almost every Christian service. He made this point to set up the following question. Do Jews have a problem speaking about faith and experience of God? Rabbi Sacks, who has an answer ready for any question any interviewer has ever asked or will ever ask, said, I think Jews do have a problem speaking about God, and I'm not sure why. Rabbi Sacks went on to argue that we used to be the God-intoxicated people, but that our exile had gone on for too long, and we just lost faith. We internalized the message of anti-Semitism, that the Jewish people were unworthy of God's love. So we stopped feeling that love. We stopped seeing God's love for us, and we stopped loving God. This was a problem that Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik recognized 61 years ago when he spoke on Yom Haatzmaut. He said, the period of Hester Panim, divine concealment, brought confusion among the Jewish masses, and especially Jewish youth. Assimilation increased, and the urge to flee from Judaism and the Jewish people reached its apex. Fear, despair, and ignorance caused many to forsake the Jewish community and climb aboard the ship to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The Rav was referencing the Navi Yonah with this image. A seemingly unstoppable tidal wave stood over us and threatened to destroy us. Jews had internalized the anti-Semitic stereotypes. We were emaciated, passive, weak, conniving, and ugly. Given the opportunity, Jews quickly undressed themselves of their Judaism. According to Rabbi Soloveitchik, the state of Israel slowed this process of flight. Many partially assimilated Jews found themselves beset by hidden concern for the newly founded state. Even Jews who were hostile to the state of Israel had to defend themselves from the strange charge of dual loyalty and proclaim daily that they had no stake in the Holy Land. Said the Rav, it is good for a Jew when he cannot ignore his Jewishness, and he is obliged perpetually to answer the question, who are you? Like Yonah aboard the storm-tossed ship, when the state of Israel came into being, Jews had to confront their identity. They were forced constantly to hear the name Israel on the radio and in the newspaper. They were forced to consider, who am I? The state of Israel changed what it meant to be a Jew. But in the state's early years, during which the Rav wrote, it did not change how a Jew thought of God. The return to the Jewish identity did not necessitate the return to God. In his book, Like Dreamers, Yossi Klein Halevi describes Haifa in the 1950s. Wearing a kippah on the streets of Haifa was not self-evident to a religious boy. Most B'nai Akiva boys wore berets, and an effective disguise, since only religious boys wore them. Secular children taunted them with a nonsense rhyme, aduk fistuk, pious pistachios. Young religious Zionists suffered from an inferiority complex. Israel's pioneers and military heroes were almost all secular. The secular youth movements dismissed Bnei Akivaniks as Zionism's rear guard, more suited to becoming accountants than farmers and fighters. When Bnei Akiva groups climbed Masada, they were taunted by their secular counterparts. When Bnei Akiva climb Masada, they say Shema Yisrael. A religious Jew doesn't fight. He prepares himself to be martyred. I can tell you a personal story to make this point. As a little boy, my parents took me to Miami to visit my great-grandfather. On the beach one day, a couple of old Jewish ladies stopped my mother and began to coo over me. They said, "What's his name?" My mother said, "Chaim." The ladies looked back aghast. How can you ruin a Jewish boy's future with such a Jewish name? The book of Yehoshua describes this very reality, the shame of exile and disgrace of God's distance. Vayomer Hashem el Yehoshua, Hayom galoti et cherpat Mitzrayim aleichem. God said to Joshua, today, 40 years after leaving Egypt, I've rolled back the reproach of Egypt from you. We think that Pesach ended with the crossing of the Yam Suf. It did not. We think that Israel became independent in 1948. It did not. You can take a Jew out of Egypt, but can you take Egypt out of a Jew? God may have returned us to our land, but our land has still not returned us to our God. Faith, the ability to feel God's love for us, his people, is an ongoing process. It is our process. This transformation could not take place in one generation. The move from Jewish fate to Jewish faith, from Jewish fate to Jewish destiny, the move from victim to hero takes place every time a young Jew enters Tzahal. The IDF testifies to the Jewish people's willingness to re-enter history. Our people has once again come together to fight and to sometimes die, to remove this cherpah, to say clearly before the world that Jewish blood is no longer cheap, that Jewish blood will never again be cheap. This year, we commemorate 50 years of a reunified Yerushalayim. We often focus on the territorial conquest, Yehuda, Shomron, Sinai. Those with good memories remember the release from existential fear. The Six-Day War ended a horrible period of doubt about the very survival of Israel. The joke at the time was, quote, "Will the last person to leave please turn out the lights?" Yet few consider how the meaning of the word Jew and what it meant to be a religious Jew changed only 50 years ago. Pre-1967, Orthodox Jewry was said to be dying. Our communities were fragile and withering. Virtually no one learned Torah. It wasn't cool to be religious. Where were the schools, shuls, kosher this, that, and the other? Where was the robust, vital Orthodox community that we now take for granted? It wasn't. With the Six-Day War, that changed. From our renewed national pride came the beginnings of religious faith. Har habayit biyadenu. The temple was not just in our hands. It entered our hearts. God began to penetrate the heart of Israel. For the first time in 2,000 years, we could speak of God's love for the Jewish people. My mother-in-law grew up as a religious girl in Israel during the 1960s. She described to me how every young girl had taped to her bedroom wall David Rubinger's famous photograph of the three tzanchanim standing before the Kotel. They, especially Dr. Yafat, were the heartthrobs of a generation. They changed the self-image of what it meant to be a Jew. We were not, and are not, emaciated, passive, weak, conniving, and ugly. We were not, and we are not, bereft of history and holiness. Look at that picture. Those soldiers standing proud, strong, and ready to embrace our people's destiny. They stand as Jews in awe of holy space, unafraid to experience God's grace. Jews all over the world felt that moment. They soaked in that image. Jews from the Soviet Union to Canada understood the Torah contained within that image. God still loves his children. But do we, God's children, still love God? As we look around, as we look at the Jews of Israel, of Canada, of the world, we must ask this question: can we love God again? Can we become God-intoxicated people once more? The Jew is out of Egypt, but is Egypt out of the Jew? Is it possible to love God after 2,000 years of anti-Semitism? Many assume that 67 was the pinnacle of Israel's triumphant story. They are wrong. 1967 may have been Israel's greatest military victory, just as Kriyat Yamsuf was the greatest of God's miracles. Yet it was in the desert that we grew free. Those 40 years, they were the time during which Cherpat Mitzrayim was slowly removed. Today, we are in the midst of the greatest transformation of the Jewish people since those days 3,500 years ago. It is upon our souls that the possibility of Jewish faith is being renewed. With every soldier who dons the uniform of Tzahal, with every tear shed for a hero, with every Jewish child born in safety and hope, comes faith. Perhaps we can once again love God. This is where you come into the picture. If you were ever called upon to do so, every person in this room would give himself or herself for our people. That is what it means to be a Zionist. This community has a crucial role to play in renewing our people's faith in God's love. We are the epitome of the argument against anti-Semitism. We stand as Jews, as Yirei Shamayim, as people of faith. We say that the Jewish people might once again be the God-intoxicated people. We carry a new image of Judaism. We carry the flag of Shabbat, of Tefillah. We carry the flag of the IDF and of Israel. We show how a thick and deep Jewish identity enriches life as we exhibit renewed confidence in our people and faith in our God. With our every step, we say that there still is a God in Israel. Our people need us. Our Zionism calls upon us to think not for ourselves, but for the Jewish nation. We must share our commitment to Israel. We must share our devotion to Torah. We must share our love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu.